when you aim to only do something that lives within boundaries and appeals to someone's like way of thinking today, it may not be the right thing for the greater mission. People that live in the business of like glue code to tie it all together to like make a business out of it because no one else has to understand it. Like, to me, that's playing your own personal game, but like we are all in this business for the long game of the national defense strategy, right? So like, how are we constantly aiming after that thing? And I think it changes behaviors for interoperable architectures. I think it changes behaviors for people who are like, hey, I'm in the services business, but I'm not about just scaling services. I want to actually deliver something that has like return on its value for you, government, whilst keeping me in the business. And I always liken it to people that play in that space as like the good mechanic, right? Like, hey, like I've got this weird noise coming from my car, right? I go to this mechanic and the person's like, oh, it turns out you just had a loose bolt. Like nothing wrong with your brakes. Brakes are absolutely fine. Totally good. And like, how much do I owe you? I was like, dude, it was one bolt. Don't worry about it. But you might need new tires, right? You're at whatever mill. And it's probably going to last you another 10K miles. Well, in 15,000 miles, because no one ever does it on the dot. But at like 15, they're like, oh, snap, I should probably, like, I'm slid a little bit. It's raining outside.
About that time, yeah.
You're going to go to the good mechanic. So, like, they may not get business in that thing, but they're a trusted advisor because the goal is, hey, I just don't want people, dying on the streets, right? Like, that's why I'm here.
It's funny, the trusted advisor aspect. There is, I find it more, maybe I want to believe it's more, in like the national security sort of arena, like the value of trust and how much of everything that gets done is less about the prescriptive policy or the org chart and it is, the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon equivalent of trust. Like, can you vouch for, and everyone's got like a real short list of, all right, if I'm really stuck, I call like Bob, Harry, or Sally, and they're going to tell me somebody to call. Who's going to tell me somebody? I don't think a lot of people get that a lot of it it's not a robotic, big sort of like, yes, it's a bureaucracy. And like, yes, there's thousands of fucking people in it.
Well,
but it's people.
But that's, there's two different things that I thought of as you're asking that question. So when I was at NGA, I got pulled into so many different meetings that had nothing to do with. And I would describe it as my friends would be like, hey, I've got another bullshit meeting to go to. And they're like, what's that? And they're like, well, I'll have friends that are like, I feel like I'm just being told it's just a whole bunch of bullshit. But like, I'm not like a techie person. And I'd be like, I don't understand what business you're in, but like, I like tech. And so they just pull me into a meeting and be like, hey, like, what are they talking about? Like, is that actually like, does that even make sense? That's actually, I got included in the cloud stuff at NGA. Like, I wasn't part of the cloud PMO, but I had friends that were in the team and they're like, there's this guy saying this crazy stuff. Like, can you come sit in? And I was like, ooh.
So it's somebody else's server.
But like, I feel a lot of people don't play that game, one, because I've actually seen people play it in a very different way where like, it's not about trust or whatever. It's like, well, their job is supposed to be this thing from like A to C and I pick up at D and I'm yelled at constantly from like how well D, E, and F are doing. So like, as long as it's not D or an F, like I don't care.
Yeah.
And I think it's different because like people in the soft community, they don't care about D, E, and F. They may play the role there, but they understand it's about getting from A to Z.
Yeah.
Right. And I think when you become, this is a hypothesis we have in a research paper we're writing, but like as you become a larger and larger organization and you start to mature and you understand the boundaries of where you start and other people start, you start to get a kind of tunnel vision of what it is that you're doing, and you lose that value stream like we were talking about. And when you lose your loss of context of where you are in the value stream, like whether you're a core role or supporting role, whether you're even needed at all, right? That's when you start to insulate, and that's when you start to draw, metrics that only measure your little world.
Yep.
And therefore, as long as you did your thing, everything is fine, right? Like, I just think it's a flaw of large organizations as they become too big. And I saw it a lot in the Army. Army's the third largest organization in the world.
Yep.
And I don't think it's anyone's fault along the way. I just think it's like over time, you've like atrophied and you lost the point of like, hey, what's the whole point of any of us existing?
Yeah, if every year it just gets a little smaller, a little smaller, a little smaller.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think there needs to be, part of the hypothesis of the research paper is value stream mapping as a way to get context of your role in an ecosystem not only helps drive greater purpose of each one of the contributions along the way, but also drives greater clarity of senior leadership in the C-suite to make appropriate investment and divestment decisions for people, process, and technology.
It's like a temporal positional sort of relativity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because everything is...
That's super interesting.
Right, because it's not a point in time thing. It's a continuous thing. The world's
Yeah.
constantly evolving. Your people, your process, and your technology should be constantly evolving. And understanding... Like, for instance, I made this comment on the side that sounds angry, but like there are certain organizations that still exist today that serve absolutely no purpose for the value of the DoD. None. I love you with all due respect, but like you just don't exist. But no one's in a place to be like, oh, that was once a core critical thing that we need, and it should have moved into a supporting function, and now it should move into a divestment function, but it's still not happening because certain dominoes need to fall before it happens. And so it just kind of still persists. And I think it's the same thing with digital transformation today. Like, if we're driving after to replace where we were toiling with people, where technology has already filled that gap, it might mean an organization or a role goes away, right? But sometimes the people that you're asking to implement it are the people who are vying to take on the position of the thing that should be divested of.
I mean, you run into two like challenging, you've got that, right? Just like the sort of like political and emotional side of organizations that's like, well, that's if that job goes away, what does that mean to my career, my journey?
Right.
And then you've got like the larger sort of political, like national security is like a little bit of jobs program in the United States.
Yeah.
So like removing jobs from that
gets
people who need to get reelected really upset.
We can go back to BRAC, right? Like base
super dangerous space to go.
Dude, base realignment and closure.
Yes,
actually,
I would love 700 new boats, please.
Right,
Sick.
Well, it's like base realignment and closure was super dramatic. Why? Because constituents are like, yo, congressman, losing the job here.
Yeah, you want to get someone's attention. That's
exactly.
Sick. I'm closing this base.
Exactly. So anyways, at the start of the Army job, knowing that closing data centers and consolidating to cloud computing was a big drive. Actually, I had a mentoring session with someone who, former in, we'll say, exceptionally senior spaces in the DoD. I was like, what about this problem? And he goes, that's not your problem. He's like, that's the Hill's problem. Do the right thing for the national security mission and for modernizing the DoD. Don't worry about that. Like be aware of it, but that's not your job.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, man. So no doubt, like ruffle
trust that boogeyman's not going to pop out of the fucking woods.
But I think it's part of it was a reminder to me is like when you aim to only do something that lives within boundaries and appeals to someone's like way of thinking today, it may not be the right thing for the greater mission. And I even use the same thing for stuff we're doing in the Army. Is I would draw as part of the benefit of being clueless. Like I had no experience with the Army. Like the deepest I went was the Army GEO battalion over at NGA as a major customer of what we were doing in GWAT. But like I don't really know the Army, so I'll drive architectures and do all these fun little things, and people are like, "Ooh, like that's so and so's job." And I was like, "Well, I don't know. Like it's the right thing to do. Then why aren't they doing their job?" And so there's kind of a benefit to being clueless there. Whereas I remember this one time I drew a network architecture of something, and somebody else I was like, "Oh yeah, we drew a picture too." And we like compared our pictures. And I was able to draw like very clear lines and boundaries of the systems that they drew around existing organizations in the Army.
Yeah.
And I was like, look at mine. Can you draw those lines? And they're like, ooh. And I was like, you drew what we need according to authorities today. What do we actually need according to where we could be
in the future?